give you the answer to that. But as we get started for this morning, we began a series last week, a short series titled Why, and a study through the book of Habakkuk. And we looked at last week how this is the only prophetic book that it seems to have the people responding or asking questions to God and looking for His answer rather than waiting for God to deliver a message to take back to the people, because we see that Habakkuk is complaining to God in chapter 1, and he's asking God, how long will evil prevail? Why was Babylon chosen to punish Judah? Because he's asking about when is God going to take care of the evil in the nation of Judah. And God comes back in chapter 1 and says, well, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use these Babylonian people to punish Judah. And he's going, wait a minute. That's not exactly what I was asking for. That seems a little bit too harsh. You're going to use these unrighteous people to punish the righteous people, because Judah was definitely better than the Babylonians. What we really discussed last week was having honest doubt. It's okay. It's okay to ask questions is the point. It's okay to not be sure about every doctrine that there is in the church or have every answer to every biblical question that can be given to you. If you're seeking answers from God, you can expect that He will answer you. And that's okay. I don't know of any thinking Bible student that doesn't ask questions of God and honestly doubt their beliefs, at least, about certain aspects of the Bible. And that is okay. Sometimes in times past, some more recent than others, the church has almost seemed like asking questions, was you doubting who God is? That is not necessarily the case. It can bleed over into that. But having honest doubt, honestly seeking answers is no problem. You have to approach God, though, with an understanding of who you are and who He is. We are finite, which means we have limits. God is infinite, which means He has no limits, and you need to approach Him as that almighty, supreme, sovereign God who He is, rather than doing like we've done sometimes, and I know I've done. You go, God, you couldn't have done it that way. And He goes, sure I can. I'm God. Okay? You don't want to be the clay telling the potter what he should be doing, because He is definitely the one that is shaping everything. So this morning we're going to look at God's reply to Habakkuk's second complaint here in chapter 2. And the title this morning is Wait for It. Wait for it. I think this will have much application to most people that are here today that's ever prayed about anything. But starting in chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, it says, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what He will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. Then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, he is puffed up, his desires are not upright, but the righteous will live by his faith. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the peoples. So you see here in the first verse where Habakkuk has finished his second complaint, and he's sitting back and he's getting himself ready for the answer that God is going to give him. And I'm not sure about you, but when I have prayed and I've prayed for something and I'm praying with vigor, and I ask God something, especially if I'm complaining to Him, because that has happened before, I sit back and I'm waiting for that answer of what He's going to give. Some people don't wait. They just want to complain and they want to have their say and say their piece and they want to go on about their business. But for me, I know if I pray for rain, I ought to take an umbrella with me today, because He's probably going to answer that. And if He wants to be smug, He can just wait till you don't have an umbrella and start making it rain on you then. But God answers prayer. He always answers prayer. Listen to me when I say this. If you don't hear anything else I say, there is no such thing as unanswered prayer. God gives an answer. He says yes, He says no, or He says wait for it. All right. And what I try to get across to people is that God telling you no is an answer. It is. And I gave the illustration last week, and I'll repeat it today, that when Eli comes and says, Daddy, I want a snack. And I said, no, you know we're about to eat. But I want it. Well, I said, no. But I want it. And you'll tell him again, over and over. You'll just say no. And he'll go, but I want it. And I'm going, that doesn't matter, son. You said that you want it. You told me what you want. I said no. No is an answer. And we act like that to God. God says no, and we'll go, you didn't answer my question. I want it, though. You don't understand. And he goes, no. And you go, but listen, you don't understand what I'm saying, God. This is what I want. And he says no. And you go, quit not answering my question. I want it. Folks, take the no, put it in the bank and deposit it. That's it. Okay? That's what you gotta understand. And sometimes it feels like he's not answering, but he really told you. He said, wait. We only give God credit for answering prayers that he answers in our favor with a yes, okay? In our mind. We feel like, oh, that was an answer to prayer right there because somebody got healed or I got money in my bank or something like that. Sometimes he saves us from our own self, and he does it his way and not our way. And you're going to see that happen right here in the second chapter of Habakkuk today. So Habakkuk, though, was using this imagery of the watchtower and the watchman because that's what the prophets ordinarily would use, that type of language when they were speaking about receiving a message from God and they were waiting. And if you can picture, there's different types of watchtowers. You have some, and they wanted to protect their vineyards, so they put a watchtower out in the middle of their vineyard there to be able to look across and make sure nobody was going to steal their grapes or be able to harm them in any way. You would make walls around the city, and they'd put watchtowers spaced throughout so that people would be able to look a long way out and see enemies coming down their way. And so that's this imagery of the watchtower and the watchman. And here you have Habakkuk saying that I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me. He is expecting the answer to come from God to the second complaint that he had about why use Babylon. That's what God was responding to right here. Why use Babylon? And please finish and he's kind of, I guess, hoping that God may give him a better explanation of how he'll end evil in Judah. But in verse 2, God replies to Habakkuk, and he tells him to write down what he's about to say and to do so that it'll be made plain so that a herald may go and run with it, presumably here at a later date. In verse 3, he says that. He says, for the revelation awaits an appointed time. So that appointed time sounds like it may not be right now. He says, listen to what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to reveal to you what the answers are, but this is for an appointed time. And you're thinking, uh-oh, this sounds like it may not be right now. And it says, it speaks of the end, and it will not prove false. Here, that's a wonderful statement that God makes right there. God knows how your circumstances ends. You know how it is right now. You know how it began, and you know how it is in the present. But God can speak to how it ends. And he says, and it will not prove false. And he says, though it linger, and this is the part where he tells Habakkuk to wait for it. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. So what is he saying there? And I believe if you read that in the King James, they say, though it delay, wait for it, it won't delay. That sounds like a little bit of a compromise, a contradiction, there, but it's not. God is saying, listen, sometimes it may take a minute for things to play out in your life, but it will come to pass. It will happen. I'm sure that there's something going on in your life, something that you've been praying about, some issue, good or bad, and it just seems like that it lingers a while. But if you have been a Christian for any length of time, you know that it may take time sometimes for things to happen, but God never fails to come through. Think about Mary and Martha, and Lazarus is dead. They send for Jesus to come. And what does he do? He lingers. He lingers around. He says, well, I'm going to wait a little while. Maybe I'll go tomorrow. Maybe I'll leave in 2 days. And then he finally makes his way to Bethany. He gets there, and he's 4 days late, basically. Martha says, if you had just come earlier, my brother would not have died. And Jesus, in John 11:35, when he knew that Lazarus had died, shortest verse in the Bible, it says Jesus wept. But was he too late? Think about it in your life. How many times that the answer has lingered, right? It lingered, it waited. But how many times did he not come through? I don't know of one time in my life that he hasn't come through. It seemed like it. I mean, I was waiting, and guess what? Again, we go back to you go, oh yeah, Corey's wrong. There was this time, and this time God didn't come through. Are you sure he didn't come through, or did he just tell you no? Remember? It may have just been no. But I don't have any time that he said that, but he has told me a lot of times to hurry up and wait. And we're an impatient people. We want it now, and the more and more the generations come along, the more and more we want things happen instantly. You remember the days it took 2 weeks to get something from your house when you ordered it? Now, when Amazon doesn't have it to your house in 48 hours, you're going, what is the problem with the world? I need it 2 days. And you remember back when we paid for shipping? Now everybody's free shipping on stuff. You knew before you went to a store and bought something, because if you ordered it, you were going to have to pay shipping, and that was going to be more to the cost of that item. Now if they charge you for shipping, you're going, what? I have to go to Walmart? I mean, that's crazy. And, you just pick your groceries up and things now. Anyway, we don't want to wait. We don't want to wait. We want things now. But I want to tell you, please, the second thing, if you don't hear anything else I say, that is going to be the biggest answer to your prayers, is wait. Number one answer, and this is just in my experience. You say, how do you know that? Because I guess it's just because I'm me. The number one answer is wait. Second to that is probably no. And third to that is probably the yes. Because I can tell you that more often than not, God doesn't do what we tell him to do. He does what he wants to do. And so unless you are praying as it says in the book of John, if you ask anything in my name, then it'll be done for you. If you're praying in the Spirit of God, if you're praying in the righteousness of God with his mind and with his thoughts and his character, then yeah, basically anything you ask for is probably going to happen, because you're asking for things that he would want to see done. But for the most part, we're asking for things that we want. And you see how Habakkuk was very respectful, but he's coming to God. He sees a problem in the nation of Judah, and he says, this evil has got to be corrected. When are you going to deal with that? And then God come back, and God says, well, listen, I'm going to deal with it this way. No, that's not right. So even there, he didn't say, yes, I'm going to do that. He was changing it up a little bit. And we deal with the same things in our life. So looking down, God tells him it's not going to be immediate, but he wants him to trust him. And in verse 4, God says, he begins to talk about the Babylonians here. And he says, see, he is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous will live by his faith. That is a verse of Scripture. The righteous will live by faith. It's quoted by the Apostle Paul in Romans 1:17, in Galatians 3:11. It's also quoted in Hebrews, to where the righteous live by faith. Now, what was the issue with the Babylonians? The Babylonians, they had their military might and all of that. That was their God. They had all of their hopes and all of their desires were in themselves. And God is saying in verse 4, see, he's puffed up. This is an arrogant person over here. His desires are not righteous desires. But the righteous person will live by their faith. Their faith in who? In Jesus Christ, their faith in God. You will not do well leaning on your own understanding. You will do well to lean on God's understanding and acknowledge him in all of your ways. It gets me in trouble more than anything else probably in my life, because I'm a leader and I usually have to answer questions and I usually have to go out in front and lead. And so what will typically happen to me is I'll go, yeah, all right, that's the answer. And you step out there and you go, whoa, Nelly. And you feel the Holy Spirit just yanking you back like a dog that was running after somebody. He's on a chain and he gets to the end of the chain and goes, Arr! and bounces back the other way. It happens to me all the time. And I go, man, if I'd just taken a moment's time to be a little bit more still in that and to ask God and to trust in Him and not my own understanding, then it would work out a lot better. And in verse 5, he goes on and he ends this particular section here, and he says, indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the people. So he gave you a quick summary in his answer right here to Habakkuk about who the Babylonians were, and admitting to all of this about them. But God is sovereign. And that's where you got to start out when you begin to think about things and you begin to ask yourself, well, who is this God that I'm serving? Well, He is a sovereign God, and He may be using people that are wretched. He is saying right here who the Babylonians are. And this is to help Habakkuk to be able to understand that God is not going to allow the evil of the Babylonians to go unpunished. Because remember, what question is he answering from Habakkuk right now? Why are you going to use these people? Why are you going to use these evil people to be able to punish folks that seem to be better than them? And God is going, listen, I understand they're bad. I understand, but I'm going to tell you about what their problems are and what's going to happen to the Babylonians. But we're dealing with you over here and what you said too. So God has done that. You know, when you've answered questions from your kids, you know, especially if you have multiple children and something happened, you go, well, why didn't you whip them for, you know, the same thing? You go, listen, I'm dealing with you right now. And God has to do that to us. Sometimes we'll go, God, why? Why didn't you do that for that other person? Or why haven't you blessed me like you blessed that other person? Or why haven't you done this or that? And God basically looks down and says, just sweep around your own porch. And sometimes we have to do that. But he's given Habakkuk, because Habakkuk had honest doubt, honest questions. He's given him the full picture here. Yes, he's going to use the Babylonians to punish the people of Judah. Yes, they're bad people. And he goes on into the rest of this chapter and he gives them the 5 woes. And I'm going to look at these quickly this morning, so we can see it. And the first of these woes deals with greed. And in Habakkuk 2, 6 through 8, it says, will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. How long must this go on? Will not your debtors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their victim, because you have plundered many nations, and peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed man's blood, and you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. This thing about greed with the Babylonians, they just wanted more and more and more and more. Sound like a country? Sound like a people today? The richest nation on the entire planet, but we always got to have more. We've got to do more and more. And I was talking to somebody just the other day, and we were discussing this thing called finances. I don't know why I'd be talking about finances, being that that's what I deal with every day. And somebody said, well, I can't understand why there are teachers that have to work 2 jobs. That ought not be. That's an injustice, that teachers have to work 2 jobs. And I replied to this person and said, not trying to be smug, but I said, my wife is a teacher, and I think she does pretty well. And she got the degrees necessary to be able to do that. And this person said, well, you know, across the country on average, teachers are having to work 3 and 4 and 5 different jobs. Who? I don't know who. I mean, I'm just getting into my thought process. Should teachers make more? Everybody will say yes. Should bankers make more? Everybody will say yes. Should plumbers make more? Everybody will say yes. Should retired people get more on their Social Security next year? Everybody will say yes. If you want somebody to make more, there's always a chorus of people that will scream out and say yes, because we always want more. I said, listen, I'm not arguing with you that there are not examples of times to where people in our country should make more. What I'm saying is, what our country ought to deal with is how to to spend our money wisely and how to be thankful for what we have first. I want to tell you something. This is not a financial seminar, but I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Your money problems, by and large, are not because you don't make enough money. It's because you spend too much money. Let me tell you, I've been in banking for 12 years. I see people that make $400,000 a year who are flat broke. I see people who make $28,000 a year who are going out and eating that fast food every day if they want to and buying them a fishing boat or whatever else that they may want that is out there. Maybe I said something in my head. But it's not. I have learned it is not about how much you make. It's about what you do with what you have. And we always have to make, and again, there are circumstances, 1% of the case of the time that there are circumstances that people just have to make more. But I've only seen that 1% of the time. And by and large, it's because we're greedy and we want to do more. We want to do, and we just expect somebody to always pay us more, or we got to have more, or we're blessed with all of this. I can tell you right now, you take the brokest person in this room right now, and a lot of people would try to stand up and say, hey, I'm like Christ, I'm like Paul. I'm the chief among the broke people here. Let's take the poorest person here, and let's take them to a third world country, and let's see how you stack up then. Why don't you take that shoebox to one of these countries to where they're dipping water to be able to drink and to bathe in out of the same places that animals are? You don't do any of the such as that here. And I'm saying that one of our main fundamental problems, not just the Babylonians, I'm using this for today, is our greed. That we've got to have more and more, and we're never satisfied. We don't even see it when Paul was teaching it. Paul said in Philippians 4:13, if you start in verse 10 instead of verse 13, you'll see what he said. Paul says, I know what it's like to be hungry and to be without. And I know what it's like to be well fed, and I've been learned to be content in all circumstances, he says. And that is what, if you will be that way, I'm a living testimony of this. If you will just be content with what God gives you, and you will do well and be a good steward of what God gives you, then I can promise you he's never going to let you lack. He's not. If you're seeking prosperity and you say, oh my goodness, that plate passed around the church and I'm going to put $100 in there so I can get $1,000 back. It's going to be a great investment. Go ahead. Anybody got 100? Because we'll pass it again though if you do. If you want to try it out. I'm telling you it's not going to get you 1,000 probably if that's your mindset, but we'll take the 100 nonetheless. Good grief, anybody would. Anybody greedy is the church, isn't it? But we don't pass the plate 2 and 3 times here. You've been in a service where they did that? Never. God's going to give us what we got is what we're going to deal with, what God gives us, and he hasn't letting us lack for anything here either, has he? Amen. Praise the Lord for that. So what the Babylonians did, they went and plundered everybody. They wanted more power, more wealth, so they take over all these nations. Not only would they take the spoils, take all of the gold and silver and everything else, they'd kill all these people and murder them in a violent way. And God is not saying that there's anything wrong necessarily with power and with money, but he is saying there's something wrong with how you get it sometimes and how you attain such things. In Habakkuk 2:9-11, we deal with false security, and it says, woe to him who builds his realm by unjust gain, to set his nest on high, to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many people, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. So this is what I was saying here. God is talking to them. They have this false security because they've relied on themselves and they've gotten all of their spoils, by their own hand. And people say, I got this place in life because of all the hard work that I did and nobody else helped me to get where I am. That is an ignorant statement. God got you where you are. Because I can show you the same set of people. This is why this argument is not always true. It is true. I can take 2 people that have the same exact work ethic, the same exact degrees, And one may succeed and one may not. It depends on the choices that they make with the tools that they have. We may all have the same type of tools, but how you use those tools is different. And I can tell you, if you're using your tools for just your own gain, and you're not putting your tools into the service of God to be instruments of righteousness, you may build something that worldly looks wonderful, but it'll have no heavenly gain to it. That's a false sense of security that some people have today, just like the Babylonians. The richest among us, the more powerful people that are among us. What does the Beatitude says? Who will inherit the earth? The meek. The meek shall inherit the earth. That doesn't bode well for the powerful and the rich and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But when you look at God, and I look out in the world, I see so many people, and they're living on that mountaintop. And it's a mountaintop, and they've scaled that mountain, it seems like, by their own might and with their own resources. But at the end of the day, God will look at them and say, "Depart from me, you work of iniquity. I never knew you." What is it? If a man profit, what does the verse say? If a man profit, what good is if a man profits the entire world but loses his soul? Gain the whole world but lose his soul. Thank you for helping me with that, Miss Wilma. But what good is that if we gain everything in this world but we lose our soul? And that's a false sense of security. And people are going to be really sorely mistaken when they get to heaven's gate and realize that there was a God and that he is who he said he was, and that he said he had to live by faith through him. If you go back to what he was saying in verse 3, that it's living by faith in God. The third woe that he gave was violence. And back at 2:12 through 14, it says, "Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by crime. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters covers the sea." And if you think about the downfall of many, many oppressive countries and nations around the world, when you get power and all that through violence and might, just like what happened with the Egyptians in the Bible, they had all of those Hebrews under slavery, and they finally had enough, and they broke free from them. You've seen that across human history. Where people are oppressed, they rebel. And God, that's why we don't serve a God that forces you to believe in him. We serve a God who presents to you a gospel message that makes total sense to anybody who will listen to the message, that you have a loving God that loves you without condition, and all you got to do is surrender your life to him, and he basically begs you to come along with him. But he does not force it upon you. And so he does not like that practice when it happens to anybody else. He doesn't want there to be a marriage, for instance, to where you're staying with somebody because you're scared of them, or you're scared that they're going to kill you or beat you or all the rest of that kind of stuff. God does not condone us to be able to have people under our thumb because of violence. So such as when the Roman Catholic Church used the Crusades in history to go out and basically with the rule of a sword make people convert. God does not condone such things. He doesn't condone it. Didn't condone it with the Babylonians, who were awful and wretched and terrible for getting there that way, and anybody else that would do that. So let's just say today that you've built some empire, and you've done that through violence. And I think about people that have climbed a corporate ladder, for instance. And I was told, and when I began in the corporate world, that if you're going to go anywhere, you gotta do a lot of things. You gotta do a lot of shady type things, and what's a nice way to say this from the pulpit? You got to appease a lot of people. Let's put it that way. You got to appease a lot of people, and you basically got to give your virtue up. And I thought, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do any of that. Maybe, I think I've done just fine at my age to get to where I am. It took me a minute. It took me having to leave, and then somebody called me back and all the rest of it. But you find that people will murder you to get to a corner office somewhere. They will kill you. I mean, the world is a wretched place that we live in. You may find people, it's happened in the church. You know, people trying to climb the corporate ladder of the church, and they want to get up. I never did that. So I got here, but it was never my sight, never once outside of 2012 that I said, I want to be a pastor. Some of you want to be a pastor? No, I love youth ministry. I didn't become a children's pastor and then come up and be a youth pastor and then you got to be the associate pastor. And I think that's trash when it comes to the church. There's no ladder that you climb to get here. You're either called of God to do the particular task that you have or you're not. And I don't know that you got to do that. But in the church, there have been people fight. I think that in our church here, in the history of our church, we've seen some issues over many, many years going all the way back to times past where there's been problems, infighting in churches and whatnot, and people hurt because of those types of things. God does not want you to attain anything by getting through it through unjust means. All right. So he woed to the Babylonians for that. Arrogance. In Habakkuk 2:15 through 17. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that he can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Woo! That part right there just hit me in the eyes when he's talking to these Babylonians. Now it's your turn. Drink and be exposed, God said. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you, for you have shed man's blood, but you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. The Babylonians had gotten so arrogant they thought nobody could touch them. I sure hope you're not at that place, that you think you've gotten to some spiritual plane to where God never can deliver a spiritual whipping to you. That's not true. That's not true. He can certainly do that. He's an equal opportunity disciplinarian when it comes to that stuff. But what the Babylonians, he's telling this to Habakkuk. Now remember, and again, he's using this to answer Habakkuk and say, listen, I understand who these people are, but their way is not going to ultimately win. I'm using them as a method to get my will, to get to the place that my will needs to be. And God does use bad people sometimes to bring about his will. Think of Judas. Somebody had to betray Jesus. It was a prophecy for 30 pieces of silver. Did God make Judas do that? Did God make the Babylonians do this? No, he doesn't have to force people to do evil, but when they do it themselves, he says, I'm going to still get glory out of this. And he's using the Babylonians in that way, but look at this. Look who is still supreme. He says in verse 16, you're filled with shame instead of glory. Now it's your turn. See, what do they say? And we're not Buddhists or anything, but people always use the terminology about karma and what goes around comes around and all that stuff. It's not a Buddhist doctrine. God told us that. He said, what sow a man sow, that he shall also reap. It's not karma. It's a biblical doctrine. If you plant a watermelon, hopefully you get a watermelon and not a squash. Hopefully you get something. I don't know. It's hard to be able to do that. But if I plant a seed, I expect to grow what I planted. So what you sow, you reap. And here God is telling the Babylonians, you've sown violence, you've sown greed, and all of these things, and you've gotten to this place, but now it's your turn, buddy. And what's amazing about this, he's not saying anybody else is necessarily going to do this or is giving credit to somebody else. And I want you to get this in your head. He says, drink and be exposed. The cup of the, what's his name? Lord's right hand is coming around to you. So what did Habakkuk just hear? What did Habakkuk just hear when God said that? He goes, you're going to get them. You're going to take care of those Babylonian people. God says, yeah, just sit back and wait, Habakkuk. After I use these wretched people to take care of the problem that you were talking about, I'm going to be a just God and take care of them too by my own right hand. So let me tell you something today. What does Mary Beth quote all the time? 2 scriptures. And one of them is usually, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. All right. There is no utter reason for you to have vengeance against somebody and you to try to get back at somebody, because God says in that same part that he says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, he says. Now, who do you want? I mean, if you want, you shouldn't think about it this way, so I'm not trying to teach the scripture this way, but you can think about it pretty evil. You can say, if I want to really get them, who do I let do it? Me or God? He don't want you to think about it that way, where you haven't forgiven and all that stuff if you're thinking about it in that way. But truly, there's nothing you can do to somebody that's going to really get their attention more than what God can do. And so what he is telling Habakkuk, wait a minute, my full plan is going to come about. And you can't understand it. Habakkuk in the beginning, he's thinking about this and he's going, how, God, are you going to do this? And why are you going to do it the way that you said? And you do that to God all the time. He wants you to trust him even when you can't see the sense in what he's doing. When you think, this makes no sense, God, how you're handling this, he says, wait for it. Watch. It's going to prove itself to be true. Don't be arrogant and think you're smarter than me, is what he'll say. And that's what the Babylonians had thought. And the last thing, this is bad. This idolatry problem. He says, what value is an idol, since a man has carved it, or an image that teaches lies? For he who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or to the lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? Is it covered with gold and silver? There is no breath in it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. Now, the crowning issue with the Babylonians is that they had all of these other gods and all these other idols, and we see that with Nebuchadnezzar and the huge statue of gold and all of these things that they put in. And we today can't quite understand. We today think we don't have any problem with idolatry because we don't have any carved stone or wood figures in our houses that we worship and that we say these kind of things to. But that's not what idolatry is. Idolatry is trusting in what one has made. And therefore, you're trusting in your own power as a creator and a sustainer. So, if you say that you worship God, but you put your trust in bank accounts, homes, businesses, organizations, then you're an idolater. If you're saying, you know what? And we have to be careful here in the church. When we're looking at how God is blessed and we see money that is sitting in the bank and we go, everything will be wonderful because we got plenty of money. Let me tell you something. I don't know about you and your personal life, but you can look at a bank account one day and it looks wonderful, doesn't it? It's like, wow, look, the dump truck came today and dumped all that money in my account. And 2 clicks of a transfer button later, you got tens of dollars. Gone. Just have a house payment and car payments and children that are in daycares or school or college. Or guess what? What happens if you have an air conditioner to go out in your house and you're going, look at a roof, water leaks. I could keep on going with all of these things that happen, health care bills that are happening. And you go, wow, how did I have all that money and ready to go? It's gone. Money is here today, gone tomorrow. Literally. Okay? God is always constant, and there's no amount of spoils and bank accounts and material things that are going to ever be able to help you when it comes to everything that you need in your entire life. I like money more than not having any. I like having some more than not having some, don't you? I mean, anybody in here that says, no, I didn't write a check, please. Everybody likes having some of it rather than not having any of it. That's not a problem. It's not a problem to have a little money and to be able to eat and all that. God wants you to be able to do all of those things. But if money is what you rely on every day, then that's a false sense of security, is what I'm saying. And how many people that I know of right here in this church that at one point in time and throughout your life, you had a job, doing well, you got hurt. Money then after that accident wasn't quite as prevalent as it was before that. You didn't know what you were going to be able to do. Or a major thing takes place. Maybe you get fired and you go from making $100,000 a year to now you're making $20,000 a year standing at Walmart greeting somebody. I don't know if anybody necessarily that's happened to, but things of that nature. I know people in here that have been in a place where if you were relying on just money and all of that stuff, again, it's here today and gone tomorrow. And what God is saying in the last part of this verse, and put that back up there for me, Joe, if you will, in verses 19 and 20. Look at verse 20. He says, but the Lord is in his holy temple. He's there. He's waiting on you. He says, let all the earth be silent before him. And there's that verse that I'll end with. He's saying to Habakkuk, be still and know that I am God. And if you can take something from what Habakkuk has written down here, this was supposed to be written down so that other people would be able to hear it and other people would be able to be blessed by it. And this is thousands of years old, yet it is directly applicable to our circumstances and our life still to this very day. So that is one of the reasons why God said, wait a minute, I need you to write this down because I know these people are going to have this same message for years and years and years. When you pray, just trust God when he says wait, and again, that's what I think your number one answer is usually going to be, and just trust him, and keep trusting him, and keep trusting him, and the next week, and the next week, and the next week, I promise you, it may linger, and I'm going to use his words, not mine, it may linger, but it will not delay, and you'll get that answer, and it's going to take place in your life if you do that, and if you trust him. You don't have to like it. He don't expect you to always like it. You still got to trust. How many times has he given an answer to me that I knew was the right thing, but I went, I just don't like the way you did that. How stupid is that? That we're saying as a finite human being that I would have did it a different way. I mean, come on, but I've done it. I've said that. I know that that's an ignorant thing, but we do that. And we go, God, you should have done it this way. At that moment when I go to do that, I just take my hand and I slap myself. Because I go, you're telling an infinite creator God that you know better than him about how to sustain the world? I don't. And he humbles me very, very quickly when I do that. But he's blessed. He will bless. And I know there's unanswered questions that are out here in people's minds. Honestly ask him. Honestly seek. And the second thing I'm going to tell you, do like Habakkuk did after you ask. Prepare yourself mentally and spiritually for whatever the answer is. Last but not least, Jesus modeled this same thing for us right here. He said, nevertheless, he prayed, Father, let this cup pass from me. And then he prepared himself because he knew. He said, nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. And just prepare yourself for what God's will is in your life, no matter whatever the circumstances are. We're going to take communion here just in a moment, but let's bow for a word of prayer as we close.